scripture lesson today comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. This is the story of Jesus and Zaccheus. For those of you who went to Sunday school as a child, this is probably a story you're very familiar with. The little man Zaccheus who climbed up a sycamore tree. It's a very charming image, and there's lots of rich spiritual wisdom in this story. And this is how that story goes. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zaccheus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said, "Zaccheus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zaccheus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." This is the good news of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
It is so good to be here in your community. I was here in November, sat over here in the comfortable chairs, and what a great community this is. I felt welcome and a great worship experience, and yesterday to be here with some of the congregation, 50 of you, to look and think about and dream about the future was a great gift, and I'm glad to be back. I want to introduce myself a little bit. I'm from Ontario, which is the East Coast, and in 1988 I was ordained in the United Churc of Canada. We're a combination of Presbyterian, Methodist, and Congregational churches that joined together in 1925. And I finished my MDiv, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to continue on in the church, so I figure if you don't know what you do, go to school. So I went to Princeton and got a Master of Theology there, which was a great time to be in the United States and the Presbyterian Church. Felt a call to ministry and returned and went into the United Church of Canada in Alberta in 3 small churches, about 45 in one, maybe 30 in another, and when we had a dozen in the other, we knew we were all there and we should start. So very small. It was very small. In fact, when I went to the local town one day into the pharmacy, a woman called me over and said, "Psst, your deodorant is on sale." So that's pretty small. Or I had a real problem, I don't know. But I was there 4 years, which is the longest they ever had a minister. And then I moved to a large suburban church in Calgary, where at that point in the early 90s we had lots of kids and lots of young adults, and it was a great time for 10 years. And then I left the church, which was the best thing I've done in my 30 years of ministry. Get out of what you normally do. So for 3 years I worked for Calgary United Way and got to learn about the city of Calgary and all the great organizations that do wonderful things. It wasn't a church, and they did such amazing things. I was like, okay, I get that there's so many great things happening beyond the church. It was a very humbling thing. And then I returned to Hillhurst United Church, where I've been for 15 years. It was a small, struggling church. They said, "You're the last minister, do whatever you want." What a great invitation. And the community has grown and changed over the time, and I love being a minister there. And so when I got to meet Jane in the fall, I had hip surgery, got a new hip. I remember being on the couch. She came to our house, had a great conversation, and so I love this friendship and the bond that has started here. So I'm really glad to be here. Being with you yesterday, got a sense this is on fire. You guys are going to take off. I can just see it. The embers are there. There's lots of great things you're doing in this community. I'm not here to change that. I'm here to help maybe focus some of it. And so I give thanks for what you do already. But in our community, we recognize that you don't come to church alone. You're not in an elevator. You need to know something about the persons near you. And so we start our sermons this way. And I'm going to invite you to this question today. I wonder if you just meet someone around and say, how long have you been coming here? Maybe it's anybody first-timer today? There you go. Welcome. We're glad you're here. First-timers. Awesome. How long have you been coming here? And what do you love about this church or a church if you're new? So how long have you been coming here and what do you love about this church? You've got to talk to somebody. This is not, you got to move. If you don't like this, leave. Okay. Thank you. Good thing. Thank you. My work is done. Thank you. Maybe I'll continue that conversation, but we recognize each worship has a theme, and it's important to connect because you may have shared something about your life briefly, and that continues. And so worship is interactive in that way. It's not one person with the wisdom at the front for the shared community. Let us pray. Spirit, we give thanks for this beautiful day. Some of us have come here today because we are in sorrow or sadness, felt alone. Help us meet another. Some of us have come in fear, worried about the world or the future. Some of us come in deep gratitude for life and all that it offers. Hold us in this time together that we may know your love and your grace. Einstein is apparently attributed with this phrase that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting it to be different. Churches can be like that. Do the same thing over and over again, expecting it to be different. And they say that curiosity kills the cat, but I would argue that curiosity never kills a church. We have to be curious. We have to be curious about what we do and how we do things, always open to a sense of difference and opportunity and possibility. 2 years ago, I was on a sabbatical in the United Churc of Canada. You get 3 months every 5 years to leave your congregation and test things out and explore. And so I toured other churches in the 3 months, and what struck me was how curiosity was not in most of the churches I was at. There was a lack of urgency. There was a lack of possibility. It seemed to be ho-hum or just politically correct, one thing after another, but there wasn't a sense of spirit of curiosity. And I think curiosity is essential to every lively, vibrant faith community. We've got to be curious with questions, with wonderment. And our faith is centered around a person named Jesus who is curious penultimate. Very curious. You know, he asked 307 questions of people in the Bible, and he only answered 3. Jesus was a questioner all the time. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? Who do you say that I am? Question after question after question in the scriptures. Jesus loved questions. Jesus was a curious person. Always curious, always on the outer edge. Not sitting in the temple, but out in the world, posing questions, engaging people about what life is about, and sharing conversations and stories. I kind of hope that in my life that I'll live it full of questions, and I'll be on my deathbed, and just as I'm about to take my last breath, I'll say, I wonder about. I hope I'll always have a question on my lips and my mind. I think curiosity is essential. Curiosity is essential in our life, in our relationships, and ultimately in our church. And this text you heard a moment ago is a fabulous example of curiosity. You know, that Jesus is going into Jericho, and Zaccheus, he's got a bit of a bad reputation as a tax collector. People don't quite like him. He's short of stature, and so he's wise enough to figure if I'm going to see this Jesus, I've got to get up a tree. Short in stature, he climbs literally up on a tree to look down at Jesus coming to town. Well, all the disciples who are there are shining their halos. They're so sure that Jesus is going to eat with them. And Jesus walking in town looks up and sees Zaccheus in the tree and says, Zaccheus, down here. I'm staying at your place for lunch. Everybody's like, what? Him? Do you know who this is? Zaccheus is a bit embarrassed too. He comes down, and Jesus, I imagine, has a conversation with him, saying, Zaccheus, I like your curiosity. And then he says, well, I tell you, if I ripped off anybody, I give him back fourfold. In this conversation, Jesus says to him, Zaccheus, salvation has come to your house. Now, salvation wasn't just life after death. The word salvation has got a root, salve, healing has come. Or I love this definition, it's to develop without hindrance is what salvation is. It's not just afterlife, it's about this life. And I believe Jesus was plucking them out of a tree, if you will, saying, your curiosity is an example for everyone. Can you imagine if people had the courage to go out on a limb, to climb a tree, to be that curious about what salvation looks like in this life? I think curiosity is essential in church life. And I'm working with part of your congregation yesterday and all of you in this next while to consider not what new things we might do only, but how we might organize ourselves around the values that are essential to your life and community. Our church has 4 values, and I'd like to tell 4 stories that tell you something about the values of our church. 4 ways in which we seek to be faithful and curious where we are, because curiosity is at the ground of all of our values. The first in our community that the people named was, we want to value hospitality. Hospitality is an ancient biblical tradition. We realize that you got to eat and drink together, that when you eat and drink with people, you're changed because you share something that's important to you in the food exchange. Hospitality is important. And I know this church already does amazing eat and drink together. That's a great thing to do. I saw it one day when I was preaching my sermon just like I am now, and I noticed everybody over here was looking behind me at something going on. And a gentleman wandered out through the door there and stumbled a bit because he'd had a little bit too much to drink the night before. And he landed right here in the front pew. Without a second going by, someone went to the back of the church, got a hot cup of coffee, walked up, and gave it to him. Right there, no judgment, a pat in the back, and a hot cup of coffee, hospitality. That's what they say, you know, don't speak with words, just see with example. Hospitality is at the heart of our church. We eat and drink together on Sundays and throughout the week. We know that you got to eat and drink with people who are different so that you're changed and transformed. So hospitality is at the heart of our church. I know it's at the heart of this church as well, and it's something to celebrate. Eating and drinking together is ancient, and it is transformative, and it's curiosity in the conversation. The second value of our community that we named was spirituality. We recognize that all people are spiritual, whether they ever come to church or not, which is a religious thing to do, but we're all spiritual, and how do we open ourselves to spiritual life? Spirituality means breath or wind. It gives us life, spirituality. We have all kinds of programming in our church because we recognize that we want to nurture and deepen our soul life. And it came to me in this particular story about what spirituality and spiritual nurture looks like in our community. I was asked to be a convocation speaker at St. Stephen's College in Edmonton, and I wanted to write and think about what spirituality was about, and in particular, spiritual hunger. You know, the culture is starved for nourishment of our souls. So I sat at my computer and I was typing spiritual hunger, spiritual hunger. The only thing that happened was I got more hungry. So I got up and I grabbed my books and I said to the secretary at the time, I'm going to the Tim Hortons, which is a coffee shop next door. Maybe you know about Tim Hortons here in the United States. And I came in and I put my books down and I went to the counter and I looked at the woman behind the counter and I said, what are you hungry for? She looked at me and she said, who the hell are you? I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just on the spiritual hunger, spiritual hunger. I said, I'm the minister at the church next door. She said to me, church. I gave up on church. I said, why? She said, well, when I was a teenager, I got pregnant, and the church shunned me. I got tired of the thou shalt not judgment of the church. I said, I'm so sorry that you experienced that. I'm the minister of that church, and I think you'd be welcome there. I was about to leave, and she said, hold on, you asked me a question. What are you hungry for? I said, oh, yeah, right. said, I'll tell you what, I serve in a coffee shop, and I'll tell you what people are hungry for. People are hungry for tolerance, and for acceptance, and for unconditional love. And I reached in my pocket to pay her for the coffee, and she put up her hands and she said, it's unconditional. Isn't that amazing? Here's a woman who works at a coffee shop, shunned by the church. She says people are hungry for tolerance and acceptance and unconditional love. And all of the programming that we try to do is about encouraging tolerance, encouragement, and unconditional love. And I think this world's starved for it because there's so much bad religion out there. You just turn on your TV, it's everywhere. But how can we as a community be about good or great religions? Tolerance, acceptance, and unconditional love. And so that value is key to our communities. We try to remember that we're all hungry and we need to be filled with that kind of unconditional love. The third value in our community is social justice. And social justice is, it's easy to love everybody on Sunday morning, right? You get out on the road tomorrow morning, what's it going to be like? Or your neighbor you can't stand, or all the things that are going on. It's hard, but how do you walk the talk is the phrase we want to say, social justice. And it came in our community through a man named Paul, who was nicknamed Smokey. And in our city, we're an inner city church, and there's lots of people, just like you have here, who come to the church for a variety of reasons. Smokey loved to come to church as well. You know, he grew up, and at 3 years of age, he was put in a taxi and sent to his relatives to be raised. And those relatives had drinking problems, and he ended up in a very difficult situation. Ended up being on the street. And Smokey was part of our particular community, and he was the kind of guy who would go up and down the street collecting money, and he liked actually living on the street. He was in and out of shelters, in and out of jail. And Smokey Paul would come to church, and you know, I'd be doing a sermon and I'd raise a question, a rhetorical question, but no, he had an answer. And he would engage sometimes in the questions. But he would collect his money and give it to us, and we would keep the money for him and dole it out as he needed. I remember when the fires were happening in the north of Alberta, he came out the door and he poked me on the shoulder and he said, Pentland, give $40 to the Red Cross, they need it. Or he was the kind of guy, he'd be sitting outside the grocery store with a cup and he'd collect the money, but when kids would come by, he'd give them a loonie and say, here, take this, pay it forward. He was the kind of guy who would borrow some flowers on the way to church. Place them at the front, just like this. One year he borrowed a Christmas tree for staff. I had at least 2 weddings where when he knew there was a wedding going on, he went to the store and bought a card, and then he circled around the neighborhood, and he stepped out as the bride and groom were leaving the church, stepped out and presented them with a card signed by 100 strangers. Wow. With grubby fingerprints on it. The best wedding gift ever. Well, you see, Smokey had challenges, and he ended up dying of a fentanyl overdose. It was tragic. I don't think I've wept like that before in my life when I heard the news. We decided we're going to have a funeral for him, and so 250 people came to the funeral, and I remember being there at the front, and I looked out, and the back row was all the firefighters, 8 of them. You see, he had a habit of starting fires. And they knew him quite well. But also his lawyer was there, and his social worker, and there was black and white, gay and straight, the most fabulous, beautiful, diverse community you could ever imagine in that room. And I remember as I was doing that service looking out and thinking to myself, this is what the kingdom of God looks like. Diverse, different, all unique, different stories, all hell. And that social justice commitment is, that day we raised $5,000 in his memory to an outreach ministry that now serves people 3 days a week, a lunch of 40 people from the street come and share a meal together in our community. And that outreach to homeless folks or to those on the edges is important to us as it is to you. But also our community is deeply committed to the LGBT community and the stories that happen in that community and refugees. And we know that we've got to be with those who are on the edges and those who are at the center of our communities to be lively and diverse. All circles of life matter. And it's all grounded in our church by one core value, and that's risk. Or I'll say curiosity. Curiosity is essential in our personal life and our corporate life. And it's centered around a person named Jesus who was curious about the guy in the tree, and Zaccheus had come down and was curious about who Jesus was. And curiosity is the Holy Spirit at work in our life. Because we know the story that Jesus went out on a limb on the cross, willing to die, if you will, for curiosity's sake. And we know that Good Friday is not the end, but leads to the curious nature of Easter Day. A new day, a new beginning. One more day to be curious as a person and as a community. And so those are the core values of our community. And I will work with you in this next while to help you sort out what matters most to us as we seek to be alive and well and faithful in this place and in the world. And for that, I am truly thankful. May God be with us as we journey together. Thanks be to God.
Amen.